Well, it seems Wisconsin is doing something right now. The state has jumped ahead 17 places from 2010 in a recent survey of 500 CEOs ranking the best places to do business. Joining me now from Wisconsin is Governor Scott Walker, who launched Wisconsin's Open for Business campaign. Good morning to you, Governor.
Good morning. Good to be with you again.
So I take it that your campaign, you did something right. How did you jump that many places?
Well, I think it's not only a symbolic change, it was a substantive change. We started out the day of the election talking about Wisconsin being open for business, and then we followed it up starting January 3rd when we took office with major changes. Reduced the overall burden of doing business in our state by lowering taxes, regulations, litigation, health care costs, all those things we acted on in the first days of office with a legislature that switched to Republican control. And the great news was all the Republicans voted with us, but so did a lot of Democrats and even one independent. And I think job creators are taking notice. They realize that a state that once was challenging to do business in is now a great state to do business in.
It's interesting. It's always important to show the counterpoint. If you look at what's happening to Illinois right now, they dropped 40 places in this same poll in the last 5 years. Many people are saying they're on a death spiral. Why?
Well, it really is a tale of two different states. In our case, we went up, like you said, 17 states, the fastest increase of any state in the country, the fastest, as I understand it, in Chief Executive Magazine's history of doing these surveys of CEOs across the country. And Illinois has gone the opposite direction. It's largely because they decided earlier this year that they were going to try, and I emphasize try, to balance their budget by raising taxes an unbelievable almost 2/3 on income and about 50% on corporations in their state. And as we pointed out at the time, what happened is that backfired. They now have an $8 billion budget deficit. They have the pension system that's barely half funded. In Wisconsin, we've funded our pension system 100%. We actually lowered our tax burden, and we made it easier to create jobs. In the first 3 months alone, we've had 24,000 new jobs in the private sector. Wow. 11,000 of those plus have come in manufacturing.
But, Governor, it did not come without a battle. I mean, for weeks on end, we showed what was happening in your state, and protesters who were so angry. This was such a divisive issue. So where does that stand now? Because they sued you over this, and it's my understanding it's still caught up in the courts as far as what you were trying to do about bargaining with unions.
Well, we signed the bill into law. It is in the courts right now. The Supreme Court is likely to take that up the first month of June. And for some reason, if they don't act by the end of June, when the legislature acts on the budget for the next 2 years, the Assembly and Senate are likely to put that into the next biennial budget. One way or other, the reforms we put in place that protect middle-class jobs and middle-class taxpayers will be in the next budget for the next 2 years. And the great thing is many of the protesters from Illinois and Nevada and New Jersey and Washington, D.C. Have left and moved on to other states, and instead, as this survey now shows, the people who are looking to come to Wisconsin aren't protesters, they're job creators, and we're glad to have them here growing in Wisconsin.
You know, Governor, during that time, a lot of people said, well, wow, this is really do or die for this governor. You know, he's new at politics, and he's really taken a risk by taking a stand. When you look back on it now, would you have changed anything?
Well, I think we would have acted more quickly. We tried when those senators were gone for 3 weeks. Never in our wildest dream did I think anybody in this state think that people would walk off their job for 3 weeks like that. We tried to negotiate with a few of the more, I think, civil, discerning Senate Democrats, where the reasonable ones. In the end, they were held hostage by a radical element of their caucus, and we would have moved more quickly on that. But I think, you know, hindsight's 20/20. In the end, it's worked out. It's made it more effective. And you look at school districts and local governments around the state, even without the law fully being in effect yet, many of those districts have settled for the kind of savings that we're talking about. And long term, not only does it save the budget, it ultimately will improve our schools, because our schools will now no longer be held hostage to seniority and some of these other union contracts. Instead, they'll be able to put their best and their brightest in the classroom based on performance and merit.
So many times, people on the national scene say, hey, we should look to the states to see how they're doing things. What do you say when you hear that and you look at the jobless numbers, up to 9% now nationally, and you look at this national debate now that we're having about our country's deficit? What can our country learn from you?
Well, I think in the states we've found that if you want to create jobs, you got to do two things. You got to create a better business environment, and you got to get your finances in order. And clearly, the federal government is far from doing that. That's the great debate going on in Washington right now. But we just, a couple of weeks ago, Standard & Poor's was talking about something really quite shocking, a downgrade, going to a negative outlook on the federal government's bond rating because of these challenges in Washington. We just had earlier this week all three national bond rating agencies affirm our bond rating because we've made the tough choices, not only to balance the budget deficit we inherited, but to essentially eliminate our structural deficit. Those are things that are important because long-term, not only bond rating agencies, but more importantly investors, job creators, they want to know where you're headed.
Right.
And in the case of the states, at least here in Wisconsin, we're heading in the right direction.
All right. Today we had two politicians from the state of Wisconsin, Paul Ryan, and now the governor, Governor Walker. So great to have you on this morning. Thanks so much for joining Fox and Friends.
My pleasure.